Okay, in this section we're going to begin a whirlwind tour of looking at how to control particle motion and the different operators that are available there. We'll go ahead and use the keyboard shortcuts to get into the TPUI, create our first dynamic set, and we're going to go ahead and use the generator particle draw to go ahead and create some particles. This will just give us a real simple starting point to look at what happens. And move up here. Okay, so particle draw is wanting some all particles. Let's make their lifespan 100. And then we're going to go ahead and make another rule, which we're going to use in a second. First, we want to take a look. When we come up here to the standard operators, the simplest motion operator is probably velocity. Velocity is going to assign some velocity, direction, and speed to some particles. Right here you can see that we're connecting it to this particle draw born particle output. And we've mentioned it before, but I just want to reiterate. Born particle is only outputted once when that particle is born. So this velocity assignment only happens once. This is different than if you create another rule and add the all group and add the velocity here. What will happen is every frame iteration or every time subsample iteration, it's going to evaluate this velocity. So this is very different. It'll do it every single frame as it goes. Versus particle draws born particle, which is only when those particles get born. Let's go ahead and actually disable this dynamic set right now. Right click it, turns gray. Come back here, and we want to take a look now. Velocity can be set to issue a speed and direction to particles, or just a speed, or just direction. These are very useful when you want to modify particles who are already moving, or a lot of other special cases. Let's take a look. The speed right now being assigned is 10 with no variation, and is being assigned in the z-axis. Let's modify that to the y-axis so we can see them go up this way. And the variation angle, we'll just leave it at 0 right now, but you can make them kind of go off in different directions. And then of course we've got these different methods like replace, multiply, added, and this per second switch. Those are very important because what this velocity operator will do is when it gets assigned to the particles, like right now it's going to say, okay, whatever these particles velocity was before, I'm just going to go ahead and replace it. That's the first method, and it's the easiest. So if we'll go ahead and enable this second rule down here and say, okay, well maybe I don't want the particles to go that way, that way. Now we'll make them go off in X direction. Well, a couple critical differences. We've got the particles being born here, being given a speed and direction up this way. And then in the next rule, these particles are being given another velocity who's going to replace what we had up here and just issue them to say, hey, go off to the right. So that's going to be the last rule that gets evaluated on that frame or subsample time. So that's the one that's going to take effect because he's set to replace. Let's disable that right now. Come back up here, and in velocity, we're going to take a look. We've got this multiply. So this is basically going to take any existing particle velocity and multiply it by these values here. In this case, it would multiply his previous speed by 10, but he doesn't really have any previous speed, so nothing's going to happen. In fact, his previous velocity was essentially 0 because he never had one. He just got born. So whatever we multiply here, nothing's going to happen. So multiply doesn't really make any sense unless he has previously existing velocity. Okay, next up we've got added. Added is going to add this velocity and direction to his previous velocity. Again, yeah, he doesn't have any previous velocity here, so it's just going to go ahead and add 10 in the y direction to him. And you'll see that they do actually get some velocity. And we'll make sure this dynamic set is disabled, so he's not affecting anything. Okay, next up is this per second switch. First, let's go ahead and we'll just go ahead and enable that. Very interesting. I mean, you can see what looks like a little bit of motion there. They do get a little bit of velocity, but not much, because what's happening is this velocity operator is now saying, okay, I'm going to add a speed over the course of 1 second. And what is 1 second? Let's go ahead and open up our max time configuration. 1 second is 30 frames. So every frame is only going to get 1/30th of this value added to his previous speed, which was 0. So it's going to be a pretty small amount. let's go ahead and do this. We'll say replace. We'll turn off per second. Let's set his speed. We'll leave it at 10. And now we're going to go ahead and re-enable this second dynamic set. And we'll set this one. Yeah, let's go ahead. X1 is fine. We'll say added per second. And so what's going to happen is these particles get some velocity at birth. Not a whole lot, but some. And that's set to replace. And then what will happen is, in the next rule that gets evaluated per frame, per time sample, the all particles are going to have this speed and direction added per second, this amount per second, to their previous velocity. So over time, they're going to go ahead and start taking off to the right, which is the x direction. Okay, and we can also add a little bit of variation so they vary it over time. But those are kind of the basic methods of velocity. You should also know that you can do things like, we'll right-click this velocity operator and say visible all, and this will expose all the available inputs and outputs. Velocity only has inputs because basically this is just going to be a parameter that modifies existing particles. It doesn't really have any outputs. But we could do things like, and actually we'll come back to this first dynamic set, remove that velocity. So this rule is just going to create some particles out here, and this rule is going to be entirely responsible for adding velocity. We're going to go ahead and set it to replace, turn off per second, no variation angle, and let's set them to go on Y. And we'll do this. We'll say, okay, what if I want the particle age to control how fast he goes? Now that's interesting. It should be able to go ahead and connect into that. Let's take a float. Maybe we have to do a conversion there. Okay. So, and this float is set to a value of 0 added. So it's going to add 0 to whatever value is coming in and send it out. So basically nothing gets added, so it's really just the particle's age. So the particle age, as it gets older, we're going to expect that he starts to speed up. Start off slow, and there they go. They start speeding up again. So, okay. So this is just one of the ways that we can dynamically modify, use existing particle properties, modify them somehow in here, and pass those values into other operators to drive other things so that it's all very responsive. And okay, so I think that's pretty much it for velocity right now.